thank you so much for taking time out of your crazy schedule to kind of give us all an update about what's going on. I can't stop reading about this, and I know that you are covering it like crazy. And by the way, if anyone has questions for Peter, please just put them in the question page. So, I know that you've said you've been covering politics, Peter, for close to 40 years. Gosh, you're almost as old as I am, Peter. And you say you've never seen a political panic like the one following the debate.
Yeah.
Now more than a week ago. I'm curious what you're hearing, what you're thinking, and kind of give us a peek of what. Well, let's start with the White House. You cover the White House, obviously, for the New York Times. What's going on behind the scenes at the White House?
Well, they're in survival mode. They're in to some extent, defiant mode. That's certainly the cue they're taking from the president, who I think for the first few days after the debate was kind of unsure what he was going to do. He was kind of in the bunker. And now he's decided, okay, he's going to fight for it. And that seems to be genuinely where his head is at for the moment. And I think they're taking their cues from him. They're trying to be aggressive. They're in some ways taking a page from the other guy's handbook by attacking the elites and the media and the country class and even their fellow Democrats, the bedwetters, as they like to put them, saying, okay, enough of this. We heard you. He's staying. So get over it. And there's kind of an aggressive feeling right now in the White House, at least they feel like they have a fight. And being a fight is better than being on a defensive crouch.
And we'll talk about sort of the opposition, if you will, within the Democratic Party or the brewing opposition. But before we do, he's got a busy week. Talk about and a chance to kind of prove himself. He's been on the campaign trail. He did the interview with George Stephanopoulos, which I think was seen largely, you correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, as kind of a wash. I mean, he didn't hit a home run, but he didn't embarrass himself, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and I don't think that they ever thought that a single interview was ever going to be like the be all and end all, assuming he didn't, crash and burn. It was going to take a number of, public appearances, rallies, interviews. He could do a news conference on Thursday, a full-fledged news conference. We hadn't had him do a solo full-fledged news conference in, I think, almost 2 years, a year and a half.
And hasn't he done fewer news conferences? I got to put on my stronger glasses. This is so pathetic, Peter. But hasn't he done fewer news conferences than almost any other president in history?
Yeah, he's done fewer news conferences than any president since Reagan, and that's as far back as we've got the numbers. So, fewer than anybody in modern times, 40-some years, and then fewer interviews, like the one you and I are doing, of any modern president going back, including Reagan. He's done far fewer than anybody else. Now, he does do from time to time, he stops, under the wing of Air Force One on the tarmac, and he answers a question or two. And he's done more of those than most of his presidents. But they're like, 60, 120 seconds, one or two questions, and he usually gives it a yes or a no answer. They're not really the same as a full-on interview or news conference. That's why I think Thursday is going to be a big deal.
Tell us what else is going on this week. So he's got a big NATO meeting, right? Talk about that.
Yeah, it's the 75th anniversary of NATO, probably the most successful military alliance in history. And it's actually a moment where they feel pretty good about the alliance in the sense that they've admitted 2 new members from Sweden and Finland. They're going to showcase that this week. They're arriving here today and will be in Washington on Wednesday and Thursday. But at the same time, of course, it's really unclear what's happening in Ukraine. And that's, the number one priority for NATO right now is helping Ukraine beat back the Russian invaders. And that battlefield is kind of a slog right now. So they're looking for ways to help.
In fact, I was just going to say, Peter, that devastating story about the children's hospital was just so upsetting. And so that is up in the air, obviously, Ukraine. But also, is this NATO meeting a good opportunity to show the contrast between the Biden administration and what former President Trump has said about NATO and kind of his lukewarm embrace of the alliance?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say lukewarm. I would say just flat out hostile. I mean, he was pretty negative on NATO his entire time when he was in office. We're talking about former President Trump. In fact, we reported in our book that he actually tried to get out of NATO. He would have gotten out of NATO had his own advisors not talked him out of it. And not just a few months ago, he said publicly at a rally that he would say to Russia, hey, if there are NATO members who haven't paid enough for their own military to suit me, go ahead and attack them. That's effectively what he said.
Right, right. So you're right to use the word hostile instead of lukewarm. That's absolutely accurate. And let's talk about what's going on with rumblings within the Democratic Party. I know there have been some closed door meetings. I read that phones were confiscated for fear of being, what was going on getting leaked to the press. Talk about sort of these various contingencies of Democrats who are really kind of weighing whether Biden should stay in the race still.
Yeah, it's a really interesting moment. I think today, in some ways, is pretty critical because of those meetings you're talking about. Both Senate Democrats and House Democrats are having their own separate meetings. And I think if you took a secret ballot and they felt like it was genuinely going to stay secret, a lot of Democrats would just say, look, it's time, let's give them a good, heroic cheer and then say, let's move on. But I think they're trying to weigh the odds, right? They're looking at him and saying, well, he doesn't look like he's going to move on. And so I'm not sure I want to get on the bad side of him and maybe weaken him against Trump if he really is going to stay in by being too public. So there's that kind of calculation going on today. And it could tip either way, right? For a while, I thought it was tipping toward the, thanks very much. And here's a go watch. Today, I'm not quite so sure. It may be that Biden is kind of holding them back and getting back in the fold a little bit.
I think you're right. There's a lot of fear about being too public about it. And also the alternative scenario, right? I mean, are people pretty resigned to the fact that if in fact President Biden were to step down or to say I'm not running again, that Kamala Harris would replace him? And I talked to somebody earlier today who's kind of a very experienced Democratic strategist or insider, and she was saying, Kamala is vice president. So if something were to happen to President Biden or he would become unable to fulfill the term, she would be there inevitably. So it would be a lot of machinations to put her at the top of the ballot or at the top of the ticket when she's already there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a really interesting moment for her because she hasn't really had a great time as vice president. People have been kind of down on her, including mostly Democrats I'm talking about. And she's kind of having a little bit of a moment though now. I mean, she is doing what you have to do as vice president. She has to be completely loyal, or at least look like anyway. You don't want to give any excuse to say she's being disloyal. So she's not having conversations, or at least none that we've found, about what ifs. But if he does step aside, she is the one likeliest to get the nomination, specifically if he were to say, I want her to have it, right? In other words, if he were to say, I'm going to step aside, but I think I picked her to be my number 2 person. I think you ought to pick her now to be. It'd be very hard to see how the Democrats would stop if that were to happen.
At the same time, Peter, what about her approval ratings? And in polls, would she be able to beat Donald Trump, or would she be in the same position as Joe Biden is right now? I mean, I saw a Wall Street Journal poll that showed Trump 6 points ahead or something.
Yeah, that's the real question. And there are no consistent poll numbers. There was a poll that came out this morning from a Democratic firm, so take it with a grain of salt because it's a partisan poll, but it did show that she was actually 1 point ahead of Trump, whereas Biden would be 1 point behind Trump. So at the very least, she does seem to be competitive in a way that people might not have expected, right? So there's the two scenarios with this. One, if she were to take over as the nominee, she would bring youth and energy and maybe appeal to some of the Democrats who've been kind of down on Biden anyway, younger voters, black voters,
right.
Energized women who are upset about Roe v. Wade being overturned. She has some advantages, and there would be a freshness to her. And she can make the age argument against Trump, turn it against the Republicans, because then suddenly he's the oldest president ever. The flip side is, are swing state voters in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, particularly white working class voters, going to be able to pull the ballot for the first black woman president? And it sounds horrible to say that that's a factor, but of course that's a question a lot of Democrats are asking.
Yeah, and also, is the country ready to elect a woman as president, regardless of race? Every time I think that we've come such a long way, then I realize there's some rampant misogyny and sexism that's still very much in play in a lot of places in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question.
Let me ask you about who Joe Biden would listen to. I mean, I've been reading so many articles, including, of course, yours, Peter. But who do you think he would be convinced by? I mean, people like Nancy Pelosi, I know, and you know, former President Obama, perhaps. What are those people saying? Because Nancy Pelosi doesn't seem to be giving her full-throated support to Joe Biden at this moment.
I think you're right about that. I think a lot of people, first of all, said the only people he would really listen to are his family. And that we've discovered is his family saying, go Joe, right? They're saying, no, no, don't back down. You've always gotten back after you've been knocked down. Don't let them bully you out of the race. So they're not obviously on the side of the people who think you ought to step aside. They're the other side. But you do sense from congressional leaders like Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, a real uncertainty here, right? They've said I'm for Joe, but not in an overwhelming, enthusiastic way. Said, right? They're not out there in the same kind of way he would want to. So I think they've been holding their, cards close to their chest a little bit. And if they decided to go together, sort of Nixon and Goldwater back in 1974, it's possible President Biden to them. I mean, if they said to him, look, you're going to cost us not only the White House but the Congress as well, both houses, that could be impactful.
Well,
We don't know.
what do they think about his chances of winning right now? Obviously, we've got a ways to go before the election, 119 days to be exact, 41 days to the Democratic National Convention. I mean, what are people saying about Joe Biden's chances of defeating Donald Trump, and whether he can recover and the numbers can start to tick up?
I mean, the problem was he went in debate. In fact, he asked for an early debate specifically because he needed to increase his support, not to lose support, right? So he's in a hole, and the question is whether you can dig out. Now, a lot of presidents get themselves into a hole, and they can in fact recover. I think the challenge here for President Biden is different. It's not like Obama having a bad debate against Romney, because the thing that upset people is something you can't change. You cannot make him younger, right? And you're not going to be able to unsee that debate. So voters who have concerns about his capacity, it's not just like, I'll do better next time, and everybody will say, oh, okay, and then it's fine, because they're not going to forget what happened before. That's the challenge. How do you reassure voters who have real concerns? Not just how he's going to be, by the way, in the next 4 months, but how he'll be in the next 4 years. He'll be 86 second term.
And what kind of position has this put Democratic donors in, Peter? Are they kind of, do they have a wait and see attitude as well with such uncertainty, even though President Biden insists he's going to stay in the race? With all these rumblings, are they kind of wondering, gosh, do we want to just give money when we don't know exactly what the ticket's going to look like?
Yeah, the most anger I hear from Democrats are from the donors. The donors are really upset, and what they'll tell you, like the people who deal with them regularly, tell you like 9 out of 10 of them don't want him to continue on the ticket. They're upset because they think they've been sold a bill of goods to some extent. That the full scope of his diminishment, if you want to put it that way, was held back and not really disclosed to them. And so they're mad, and they are holding back, some of them anyway, from their money right now. And will they get back on board if they become convinced he's sticking around? Maybe. But the trying to make them happy has been a real challenge to the Biden campaign. That's why you hear the president say, I don't care about what the millionaires and billionaires say. Well, he doesn't care because they're saying something he doesn't want to hear.
Let's talk about this article and the coverage of this Parkinson's specialist visiting the White House. I'm confused about this coverage, Peter, because I know at the White House, at the press briefing, it was explained that he was a neurologist who comes and checks on the president's health. But then there are articles that a Parkinson's specialist has visited the White House 8 times, including when Joe Biden was vice president. Can you shed some light on that story and help us understand the significance of that, if there is some?
Yeah. It's we don't know enough to completely say what the significance is. The White House law show that Dr. Kevin Kennard, who is a neurologist who specializes in issues like Parkinson's, published a paper on Parkinson's, has been to the White House 8 times in 8 months. Okay, from last summer to spring, and we don't have records since. Now, why is he that often. The White House says he didn't see the president all those times. In fact, he has seen the president, but 3 times total in 3.5 years. Okay, once a year for his annual checkup. So why is he going the other times to the White House? Well, the White House sort of implies, without directly saying, well, he meets a lot of people in the White House, but they don't actually directly answer the question. Is he there to consult, for instance, with the president's other doctors about the president's health? Is he there to talk about the president? They won't say for sure one way or the other. And I think that's what people are wondering. Okay, why is he going there so often? Now, he has been on contract to the White House going back to 2012, and he did come during the Obama too when we have visitor logs. Trump doesn't make those logs public. We don't know, but it's very possible he came during the Trump year as well. And so we don't know what it means. I think part of the problem is this White House has a credibility gap problem right now. People think that they aren't telling them the full truth, and therefore the fact that the neurologist went there so many times makes people wonder if they're trying to hide something that they haven't told us.
Well, what do you think, Peter? I mean, it seems to me that they have been protecting President Biden in terms of making him available. I've been trying to do an interview with him for quite some time. I saw him not too long ago, and he said, I want to do an interview with you. I'm sure he says that to a lot of people, but it seems like they have really been circling the wagons, not just recently, but actually during his whole tenure as president. So, and there have been a lot of questions about the White House press corps, and have they been asking enough questions about the president's health and his cognitive abilities? I'm just curious how you're feeling about the level or lack thereof of transparency in this White House.
Well, I do think that they've been trying to protect him. I think you're right. For anybody not to give you an interview is a sign that they obviously are not making good decisions.
Oh, shucks, Peter.
Don't take it personally. It's not just you, right? He hasn't given the New York Times an interview in his entire presidency. I think that's the only president in my lifetime who hasn't. But not just us. The Wall Street Journal, the Washington, the LA Times, USA Today. No newspaper has got an interview with this president 3.5 years. It never happened before. That's just really odd. And of course, it makes you wonder, okay, what are they worried about? Why won't they do that? And, obviously they have been trying to make things as positive for him as possible. They understand that he, isn't as strong at night as he is during the day. That, by the way, might be true for many of us, right?
Right.
Not unreasonable to have some accommodation due to age. He's 81, but they haven't wanted to own up to that. Rather than simply say, yeah, he's 81, he can't do this, and so we try to do that to make things better for him, but he still makes good decisions. They attack people for even asking the question. And we've been writing about his age consistently for a couple years now, but it's reasonable to ask whether we should have been asking more questions or writing more. I don't know. It's a good question, but we have been writing those stories, and they have complained vigorously and vociferously when we do. They definitely don't like them.
It's a very tricky area, isn't it, Peter? Just as a human being, taking away, being a journalist or reporter, it's very uncomfortable and awkward to start questioning people about their age without seeming ageist or, cold-hearted and mean. So I'm sure that human sort of inclination has entered into all of this as well. And I'm curious about Hunter Biden's role in all of this. I know Fox News is making hay that, Hunter Biden is running meetings and all this stuff. But how big an influence is he, and what role is he taking in the White House right now?
Yeah, I don't know if he's running meetings.
But that's what they're sort of being hyperbolic, I think, as they often are, and saying stuff like that.
But he is very prominent right now. The president had him at Camp David last weekend. He's said to be one of the people most vigorously urging his father to stay in the race. He was at the White House in the last few days at least a couple of events. And I think that there's a lot of Democrats, put aside Fox News, they're never going to obviously like Hunter Biden, but a lot of Democrats I've heard are upset about this too. They're like, wait a second, it took you 5 days to call Hakeem Jeffries. It took you 6 days to call Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, but Hunter Biden is the one you're listening to right now. I think there's a lot of Democrats who find that a little upsetting.
And why does the president, I know that when he had the interview with George, he said, I take a cognitive test every day. Talk to us about his refusal to do that, and what kind of medical records do you have access to that would kind of show you, and ergo the American people, that he was in good enough shape to run the country for the next 4 years or even now?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly the right question. You know, the president says, I've released all my medical records. That's simply not true. That's just not true. I mean, when John McCain ran for president, for instance, he released 1,000 pages worth of medical records. We get a 6-page summary by his doctor. That's what we got in February after his most recent checkup. Now, there's a lot of detail in that 6 pages, but it's not all of the records. What he said in those 6 pages in that letter was that they did a detailed neurologic exam and that there were no signs consistent with Parkinson's or some of these other diseases of that type. But then he doesn't elaborate on anything. It doesn't tell us what those exams consisted of or what they did see or didn't see. And I think the problem is that a lot of people out there have experience with Parkinson's or similar issues in their family with their parents or their husband or their wife. And they've seen signs like this. And so when they're watching, everybody's, an armchair doctor right now. I'm not a doctor, but we're all seeing him in real life. And a lot of us recognize things that make us ask questions. And that's why I think they've never made his doctor available to take questions from the reporters, not once. Again, that's different than every other White House I've come.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have previous White Houses, not just John McCain, but have other presidents given more information vis-a-vis their medical records and health issues?
Not a lot. I mean, they're not all great about it, to be honest with you. Obviously, Trump was particularly, not helpful in terms of his health. I think most recently he released a 3-paragraph summary. And you remember, of course, that letter he released in the 2016 campaign from his doctor that said, flourishes about how he's the most healthy guy in the history of the world or whatever, which the doctor later admitted was actually written by Trump. And he was forced into putting his. So we've never gotten good transparency on Trump by any stretch. And we should remind people, it is true, he has had his own issues with confusion, memory loss, and mixing up names and cognitive issues. So we shouldn't pretend he's only Biden. But obviously at that debate, it looked more about Biden. It looked so frail.
If in fact Joe Biden says he is not going to run, and I'm going to get to a couple of viewer questions if you have time, because I have very smart followers, but if in fact he says that, we were saying how Kamala Harris would be sort of a fait accompli, but what about this idea of a mini primary? I know James Carville wrote about it, I believe in the New York Times. It could have been the Washington Post. I've been reading so much, but also Representative Clyburn has mentioned this from South Carolina, kind of having these series of town halls where it would be basically 8 candidates sort of convincing the American people that they should be, at the top of the ticket or a part of the ticket. Is that getting any traction at all?
Yeah, we're in uncharted territory, right? Because not in our lifetime have we had an open convention like we're talking about having this time. So nobody knows what to do because there's no real experience with it. So I think that, yes, if the president were to step aside, let's say, and he were not to say, I think it's Harris, I think it would be pretty much a jump ball, and a number of candidates would probably jump in, and they'd have to compete for it in some fashion or another. But remember, the real audience isn't the American people. It's going to be 3,900 delegates. Right? These are the people who are actually going to make the decision. They're all Biden delegates, let's remember. And so, will they be influenced by public opinion? Yes, probably. But the real electorate is boiled down to these 3,900 people. And it's interesting to see because all these candidates will be starting from scratch, right? They don't have a network. They haven't been whipping these delegates. An organization of their own that really is national in scope, money, running mates, all these things haven't had to think about because they didn't think they were going to run and would have to run in almost instant. One last thing I'll say is that, yes, the convention is next month, but the ballots go out July 2nd. All
July 22nd? So yeah,
just
I think you're getting a lot of text messages, so then we can't hear you when you get them, but that's okay.
Sorry.
Don't worry. No, it's okay.
I wish they would stop. So anyway, the ballots, the DNC is planning to send out ballots on July 22nd. Right now, that ballot says Joe Biden, right? That's your only choice. You could abstain. And that's something that the president might need to worry about if there's some sort of discontent still. But at the moment, they're going out on July 22nd because they want to get a virtual roll call done by August 7th before the convention, because otherwise the Democrat won't be on the Ohio ballot. It's a screwy little snafu, but that means there's even less time to begin a campaign like this than we thought. And so it could be almost instantaneous least in the context of an American election.
A lot of people watching I think, are upset about all this conversation because it does detract from talking about Donald Trump. And a couple people said, why aren't people asking Trump to step down because he lied so much during the debate? Another person, actually several, were talking about Project 2025, which I think is getting a lot of attention. I've been concerned about this for months now and wanting to do an interview about it, but I wasn't sure people were really focused on it. Now it seems like the floodgates have opened and people are really, focused on Project 2025 and this idea that Donald Trump said he didn't know anything about it, which just seems pretty ludicrous. Do you want to just talk briefly about it? I'm going to do a whole interview about this document and the conservative group, starting with the Heritage Foundation, that really put this together, that is designed to, I think, really create drastic changes in not only government, but sort of American society at large.
Yeah, we've never seen anything like this. I mean, I think that's important to know. And I would tell our viewers today, those who are concerned, the New York Times is actually the paper that first reported about this months and months ago. So we've been doing a lot of reporting about it. I know people think we're doing a lot right now on President Biden. We are, but we have also done an awful lot of reporting, investigative reporting, tough reporting on former president. We'll continue to do that. But you're right. This Project 25 is really making the idea of our democratic system we currently think about. Right? He wants to consolidate more power in the office of the presidency, of course, only if he's in that office, in which agencies that are currently quasi-independent or independent would report to him. He would get rid of a lot of the top layer of civil service personnel who are meant to be apolitical, not supposed to be Republicans, Democrats, but serve presidents of either party. He wants them to report to him. Basically, what he's trying to do is, according to this plan anyway, is to create a whole different way of doing things, because he was so frustrated that he wasn't able to do things in his first term. Now, he says he didn't know anything about it. That's obviously silly, because all the people who are involved in making it are people who've been around him, some of the most trusted people. It doesn't necessarily mean because they're putting it together, he would do all that they say. He doesn't always listen to his advisors, but these are his people putting this together. Don't make a mistake about that. It's not some outside agitators who are making stuff up. These are the people he has surrounded himself with.
And these government civil servants are experts in various areas. They're experts in the environment. They're experts in labor, etc. And he basically wants to wipe many of them out and replace them with people who pledge loyalty to Donald Trump, which is really crazy.
It is much more about anything else. Remember, at the last part of his first term, he had a loyalty enforcer, a guy named Johnny McEntee, going around hunting for people he didn't think were sufficiently loyal to Trump. He interviewed people like, I'm going to get the details wrong, but like somebody and said, what do you think of John McCain, or something unrelated to the time? No, I'm just here to do environmental. They were really hunting for people that they could determine were anti-Trump. That's the heart of what he's talking about.
It sounds like real Roy Cohn stuff, really scary stuff, right? And that was his mentor in a way, right?
Exactly. Roy Cohn, for those who don't remember, was McCarthy's chief counsel and later a big-time New York lawyer, got in trouble, represented the mob, got disbarred at one point, but you're right, Trump's mentor in a lot of ways. And the way Trump operates is driven from what he learned from Roy Cohn, which is when you got him by the you-know-what's, just keep squeezing.
Hey, thank you for that lovely, Peter. By the way, with this NATO anniversary coming up, is the White House concerned that this is going to overshadow everything? And how is this being processed by the international community and by, NATO members in general? I mean, I'm sure the Times has done reporting about how this is landing internationally, all of this drama.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear among our allies that this means Biden will lose and Trump will win. And that is something that freaks them out. Remember, that's not just the left overseas, but even the right, except for the far right. They all found Trump to be difficult to deal with, unpredictable, mercurial, not supportive, hostile, to use that word again. And I think that they now worry even more that they're going to be on their own, that they're not going to have the United States in their corner in the same way they have before if Trump comes back. Certainly Ukraine won't. He's made that very clear. I wouldn't, if I were Ukraine, expect any money to come from the United States at that point under Trump. And in fact, he's made very clear he's perfectly willing to give Ukrainian territory to Russia as some sort of a deal. And it would be a drastic change if Trump were to take over. And I think a lot of world leaders who are gathering here this week, that's what they're talking about quietly behind the scenes.
And it's going to be hard to talk about anything else. And certainly the press is going to be hard pressed, if you will, to kind of pivot and change conversations. Before we go, is time on Joe Biden's side, do you think, Peter? Do you think the longer kind of this goes on, the more sort of begrudging support he'll receive from Democrats who are worried that this is going to weaken the party in general and hurt them in the election come November?
Yeah, I definitely think Biden's people feel like every day he survives is another day that they're closer to, getting past. Now, they're not past it, but they do have 4 months, almost 4 months to the election. And if he were able to get through those 4 months without, another day like the debate, then it's possible that he's able to turn the subject back to Trump. And that's why Democrats are feeling very skittish right now about whether to push him to leave or not, because the bottom line is they just consider this to be an existential choice. And if anything they do were to play into making it easier for Trump, that's, of course, very, very problematic for Democrats. And so they want to turn the subject back to Trump. We'll have the Republican convention next week. And so in that sense, Trump will, of course, be back on stage. He's been actually oddly disciplined the last 10 days, letting Biden stew in his own juice, which is not very Trumpian. But
I did see him do an interview. He called into Sean Hannity's show last night, and he did quite a long, extended interview where he repeated much of the rhetoric that he used during the debate, by the way. And to be continued, I guess, Peter. I'm sure after all your years in politics, as you said, 40 something, it must be strange to cover something that is so chaotic. Can you compare it to anything you've ever covered in your career?
Well, I mean, other than every day of the Trump presidency, every day, I would say every day of the Trump presidency was the craziest day I ever covered in politics, because it was just always completely volatile, unpredictable. Who knows what he was going to do next, what he was going to say next, what would happen next. It was, Susan, my wife, she would tell you, she would find me downstairs in the kitchen at 8:30 in the morning, writing my second story of the day, still in my pajamas, because, he's just constantly, throwing out tweets and, bombast and all of that. So that was really, really, really pretty times. But this is beginning to feel like that again.
Yeah, pretty exhausting, I'm sure. Well, Peter, you're so nice to spend some time with us and my followers. Thank you so much. It's great to see you as always, and let's stay in touch.
Love being with you. You're the best. I love being with you. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone.